Today we're going to explore a concept that sits at the core of high performance, emotional resilience, and true leadership: detachment. When most people hear the word detach, they think it means indifference or lack of care. In reality, detachment is about clarity. It's about being able to step back from the storm of emotions, the constant pull of external validation, and the noise of everyday life, so that your decisions are not reactive but deliberate. Neuroscience shows that the ability to detach is not only trainable, but it directly impacts stress regulation, focus, and long-term success. In this talk, I'll walk you through how cultivating detachment can unlock a level of control and composure that most people never access, and why in leadership and in life it's one of the most powerful tools you can develop. Detachment is often misunderstood as a kind of coldness, as it means shutting down emotions or disengaging from the world. In reality, detachment is about creating space for clarity and decision making. When we are too emotionally entangled in a situation, our judgment becomes clouded and we respond impulsively rather than thoughtfully. Imagine a leader in a high-pressure situation. If they let fear, anger, or even excitement dictate their choices, they are far more likely to make a mistake or miss the bigger picture. Detachment allows the mind to slow down just enough to see things as they are, rather than through the distorted lens of emotion. It is not the absence of care, but the presence of perspective. When you can detach, you can observe the situation from a higher vantage point, almost as if you are watching yourself think. That pause creates room for better reasoning, and better reasoning leads to better outcomes. Neuroscience supports this. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thought, planning, and weighing options, often gets hijacked by the amygdala, which drives fear, stress, and emotional reactivity. In moments of intensity, the amygdala shouts louder than the logical parts of the brain, urging us to act immediately. Detachment is the skill of quieting that noise, of giving your prefrontal cortex a chance to come back online and reassert control. When you learn to create that gap, even for a few seconds, you reclaim the ability to choose instead of being dragged by instinct. That's why the most effective leaders, whether in business, sports, or military contexts, practice some form of detachment. They know that without it, pressure will control them instead of the other way around. Practically speaking, detachment shows up in small moments. You might receive criticism that feels personal, but instead of firing back defensively, detachment lets you step back and ask, is there truth in this feedback? You might face a business setback and feel immediate frustration, but detachment allows you to assess the situation with composure and adjust strategy rather than spiral into blame. Even in personal relationships, detachment is vital. It doesn't mean not caring, it means caring without being consumed. If your child, partner, or colleague is upset, detachment lets you be present and supportive without getting swept away by their emotional state. This ability to hold your ground and think clearly in the middle of other people's storms is what makes someone reliable, trustworthy, and strong under pressure. The beauty of detachment is that it's not just useful in crisis, it's also powerful in daily decisions. We live in a world of constant stimuli, notifications, demands, expectations, and opinions. If you don't practice detachment, you'll end up living reactively, responding to everything around you instead of directing your own path. Detachment gives you the mental clarity to ask what really matters here, which battles are worth fighting, and which can I let go. This filtering process is what allows people to channel energy into meaningful actions instead of scattering it across distractions. Detachment becomes a compass, helping you prioritize wisely and stay anchored in what matters most. It's also worth noting that detachment doesn't come naturally to most people. Our brains evolved to react quickly because for our ancestors, quick reactions meant survival. Today, however, the threats are less about physical danger and more about psychological and emotional challenges. That's why detachment must be practiced, trained, and cultivated just like a muscle. Techniques like controlled breathing, mindfulness, or even pausing to label emotions as they arise can create the space for detachment. Over time, those pauses become automatic and clarity in decision making becomes second nature. Emotional distance strengthens leadership because it allows a leader to stand firm in the middle of chaos without being swept away by the emotions of the moment. Leaders are constantly under pressure, exposed to expectations, criticism, and the weight of responsibility for others. If they allow themselves to be overly entangled in the emotional tides of those around them, their decisions become inconsistent and reactive. Emotional distance is not about being cold or detached from humanity. It is about creating enough space between one's feelings and one's actions so that choices can be made with stability and foresight. A leader who can separate emotion from judgment earns trust, because people know they won't be ruled by moods, impulses, or temporary stress. This steadiness is what makes others feel safe to follow. Think about a leader in a high-stakes environment, whether it's a CEO during a financial crisis or a commander in a critical mission. If they panic, everyone around them panics. If they lose their temper, the environment becomes toxic. But if they can maintain emotional distance, calmly assessing the facts, acknowledging emotions without letting them dictate responses, they set the tone for the entire group. Neuroscience shows that emotions are contagious. When one person escalates, the brain's mirror neurons make others mirror that energy. The same is true for calmness. A leader who models composure sends a powerful signal that steadies the group. That influence only exists when emotional distance is strong enough to resist being pulled into collective anxiety. Emotional distance also prevents burnout. Leaders who absorb every problem, who internalize every frustration, and who carry the weight of every conflict eventually collapse under the load. They become exhausted, resentful, and ineffective. By maintaining emotional distance, a leader can empathize without drowning, can support without self-destructing. This balance is critical in leadership roles where people look to you not only for solutions but for stability. It is the difference between listening to an employee struggle with patience and clarity versus letting that struggle consume you to the point where you lose perspective. Emotional distance protects the leader's energy, and with protected energy comes sustained effectiveness. There is also a deeper benefit to leadership when emotional distance is cultivated: fairness. Leaders who are too emotionally attached often favor certain people, ideas, or outcomes based on personal bias or temporary feelings. This leads to inconsistency and erodes credibility, but when a leader keeps a measured distance from their own emotional attachments, they can evaluate situations based on principles, values, and long-term goals rather than momentary impulses. This is why great leaders are remembered as impartial and fair. They are not swayed by flattery, manipulation, or fleeting emotions. Instead, their decisions align with a larger vision, which builds respect and loyalty among those they lead. On a practical level, emotional distance requires conscious practice. It means learning to pause before reacting, asking whether a response is coming from emotion or clarity. It means learning to tolerate discomfort without rushing to fix it impulsively. It means being able to witness your own frustration, anger, or excitement without letting it seize control of your words or actions. Over time, this practice rewires the brain's response to stress. The prefrontal cortex gains more control over the amygdala, giving rational thought more space to operate before emotion takes over. Leaders who train this skill are able to stand in tense boardrooms, face aggressive questioning, or navigate personal conflict while maintaining composure that others admire and rely on. Ultimately, emotional distance doesn't remove humanity from leadership, it refines it. It allows a leader to engage with people authentically while still protecting their judgment and energy. It lets them inspire through consistency, guide through clarity, and create environments where others feel secure even in uncertainty. Emotional distance is what transforms leadership from reactive management into a steady force that carries people through change, challenge, and opportunity alike. Detachment reduces stress and reactivity because it interrupts the automatic loop between stimulus and response that so often drive people into anxiety, frustration, or impulsive behavior. Most stress in modern life doesn't come from the events themselves, but from the way we perceive and react to them. When something unexpected happens, a delay, an argument, a financial loss, the nervous system immediately registers it as a potential threat. The heart rate climbs, breathing shortens, and the mind begins racing. Without detachment, we get pulled into this cycle and respond as if survival is at stake, even when the situation is far from life or death. Detachment acts like a mental circuit breaker. It gives the brain space to evaluate whether the stressor is truly dangerous or simply inconvenient, allowing a calmer, more measured response. Stress is not inherently bad. It is the body's way of mobilizing energy. But chronic stress caused by overreacting to every challenge is deeply harmful. It drains the body, weakens immunity, and damages focus. Detachment helps prevent this by reducing over-identification with every situation. For example, if someone criticizes your work and you are fully attached, you might feel personally attacked, leading to anger, rumination, and self-doubt. But if you practice detachment, you see the criticism as data, information to evaluate rather than a verdict on your worth. That small shift dramatically lowers stress. Instead of spiraling into defensiveness, you preserve energy and clarity. This is why people who master detachment often seem unshakable. They are not immune to challenges. They simply don't allow challenges to dictate their inner state. Physiologically, detachment calms the stress response by engaging higher brain circuits. The amygdala, which drives fear and threat detection, is less likely to trigger a full-blown fight-or-flight reaction when the prefrontal cortex is engaged. Detachment strengthens this connection by training the brain to pause and observe. This is supported by research in mindfulness and cognitive behavioral practices, both of which encourage stepping back from immediate emotional reactions. Over time, the nervous system learns that not every difficulty requires alarm. The baseline of stress lowers, which means more energy is available for problem solving and creative thinking. Reactivity, the habit of snapping back or lashing out when triggered, is one of the most damaging behaviors in relationships and leadership. People who are highly reactive often regret their words and actions once the storm has passed, but by then, the damage is done. Detachment is the antidote to reactivity. By inserting even a brief pause between stimulus and response, it allows space for reflection. Instead of yelling back in anger, you can choose silence. Instead of sending an email in frustration, you can wait until clarity returns. That pause, born of detachment, transforms the quality of interactions and preserves trust with others. It turns potential conflicts into opportunities for dialogue and understanding. Detachment also helps people maintain perspective in the face of uncertainty. Life constantly presents variables outside of our control: delays, rejections, changes in plans. Reactivity to these uncontrollable factors creates unnecessary suffering because energy is wasted on what cannot be changed. Detachment allows acceptance of reality as it is, focusing effort on what can be influenced rather than resisting what cannot. This doesn't mean passivity. It means channeling energy into productive action instead of emotional resistance. Leaders and individuals who embody this principle radiate calm because they are not at war with every circumstance. Training detachment to reduce stress and reactivity requires consistency. Practices like deep breathing, body awareness, and labeling emotions build the habit of pausing before reacting. Journaling or reflecting on stressful events after they happen also helps reframe them as learning experiences rather than threats. Over time, the nervous system learns to stay composed, and the mind develops trust in its ability to handle challenges. The result is a steady, resilient presence that others notice and rely upon. By reducing stress and reactivity, detachment not only protects personal well-being but also improves communication, decision-making, and overall effectiveness in every area of life. Detachment transforms focus and long-term vision because it clears away the noise of emotional clutter and short-term impulses that so often sabotage meaningful progress. Most people struggle to focus not because they lack intelligence or ability, but because they are constantly pulled by distractions, cravings, and reactions to whatever is happening in the present moment. The brain is naturally wired to prioritize immediate rewards, but true leadership and personal growth require the ability to step back, resist those urges, and commit to a bigger picture. Detachment provides that stepping back. By separating from the pull of momentary feelings, you free your attention to remain anchored on what actually matters. That is the foundation of sustained focus. When someone is deeply attached to every outcome, Every success or failure feels like a verdict on their identity. This creates emotional turbulence that disrupts concentration. A minor setback becomes a crisis, a small victory becomes an ego trap, and energy swings wildly between extremes. Detachment breaks this cycle by reminding you that no single event defines you. Instead of being consumed by immediate highs and lows, you can keep your eyes on the horizon. This mental posture protects focus because it prevents the mind from scattering its energy across constant emotional fluctuations. Athletes, entrepreneurs, and leaders who practice detachment often describe it as a sense of stability that lets them stay locked onto their vision no matter what obstacles appear. Long-term vision requires the ability to sacrifice short-term gratification. Detachment strengthens this by loosening the grip of desires that demand immediate attention. For example, if you are attached to constant praise, you might abandon your long-term goals whenever criticism arrives. If you are attached to comfort, you might avoid the hard work necessary to achieve mastery. But when you detach from the need for approval, comfort, or instant results, you can keep moving forward even when progress feels invisible. This is the difference between leaders who burn out chasing quick wins and those who steadily build something enduring. Detachment lets you play the long game by aligning decisions with principles rather than impulses. Neuroscience supports this link between detachment and focus. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and sustained attention, functions best when it is not constantly hijacked by the emotional centers of the brain. Detachment gives the prefrontal cortex breathing room, allowing it to prioritize goals and resist distractions. This is why practices like mindfulness and deliberate breathing, which train detachment, are shown to improve attention span and cognitive control. Over time, the ability to detach rewires the brain to favor long-term consistency over short-term reactivity. It's not just about being calm. It's about creating the neurological conditions that make focus sustainable. On a practical level, detachment helps clarify priorities. When you are not entangled with every demand for your attention, you can more easily distinguish between what is essential and what is noise. This is crucial in leadership, where opportunities, challenges, and requests never stop coming. Without detachment, a leader gets caught in the trap of urgency, constantly reacting to what feels pressing but often neglecting what is truly important. With detachment, the leader can pause, zoom out, and ask, does this align with our long-term vision? That simple shift prevents wasted effort and ensures energy is directed toward the goals that actually matter. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of detachment in shaping focus and vision is the resilience it builds. The journey toward any meaningful achievement is full of setbacks, criticism, and uncertainty. Without detachment, each obstacle feels like a reason to quit. But with detachment, setbacks are seen as data points, not definitions. The vision stays intact because you are not emotionally consumed by temporary barriers. Detachment allows persistence, and persistence is what ultimately separates those who achieve their long-term vision from those who abandon it halfway. By unhooking from the emotional swings of short-term outcomes, detachment creates the steady focus needed to turn a dream into reality. Detachment is a trainable superpower because it is not a fixed trait or a rare gift reserved for a few, but a skill that anyone can cultivate through deliberate practice. Many people believe that the ability to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly in chaos, or to let go of what no longer serves them is simply a matter of personality. In truth, these abilities are the result of habits and conditioning. Detachment grows stronger each time we interrupt an automatic reaction, each time we pause before responding, each time we let an emotion pass through without clinging to it. Just like muscles adapt to resistance in training, the mind adapts to challenges through repeated practice, becoming steadier and more resilient with time. The reason detachment can be trained is rooted in the brain's plasticity. Neural pathways that fire repeatedly become stronger, while those that are not used gradually weaken. If someone constantly indulges in reactivity, snapping in anger, worrying endlessly, or attaching self worth to outcomes, those circuits in the brain grow stronger, making such behavior automatic. But when we introduce conscious pauses, when we redirect our attention, when we observe rather than react, new circuits begin to form. Over time, these new pathways make detachment feel natural, even effortless. What once required great effort eventually becomes second nature. The same way learning to drive a car or play an instrument eventually shifts from conscious struggle to automatic fluency. Detachment training can take many forms. Some people build it through meditation, where the practice of observing thoughts without judgment teaches the mind not to cling to every feeling. Others train it through breathing techniques that calm the nervous system and reduce the urgency of emotional reactions. Even simple practices like journaling can build detachment by turning raw emotions into words on a page, creating distance between the thinker and the thought. In daily life, moments of frustration, disappointment, or temptation can all become training grounds. Each time you resist the pull of immediate emotion and instead choose clarity, you reinforce the superpower of detachment. The impact of this training extends far beyond personal well-being. Leaders who practice detachment become pillars of stability in uncertain times because they can hold perspective when others cannot. Athletes and performers benefit by staying composed in high-stakes moments, channeling focus instead of being paralyzed by pressure. Every day, people strengthen relationships by responding with patience rather than anger, by listening instead of reacting defensively. The ripple effect of this superpower is enormous because one person's composure has the power to influence the emotional state of those around them. Just as reactivity spreads, calmness spreads too, and detachment is the root of that calmness. What makes detachment truly a superpower is its versatility. It applies in moments of crisis, in ordinary daily challenges, in professional decisions, and in personal growth. Unlike skills tied to specific contexts, detachment enhances every arena of life because it addresses the core of how we process experience. It reshapes the relationship between stimulus and response, emotion and action, thought and behavior. By strengthening that space between feeling and doing, it grants freedom, the freedom to choose wisely rather than act impulsively, the freedom to focus on long-term goals rather than temporary desires, the freedom to remain grounded no matter how turbulent the environment. Anyone can begin cultivating this power today because the entry points are small and accessible. Taking a deep breath before responding in conflict, pausing to ask whether a reaction is helpful, or reflecting at the end of the day on moments when reactivity took over, all of these strengthen the skill. Over weeks and months, the changes accumulate, and over years they compound into mastery. Detachment becomes a quiet force that shapes the way a person moves through life, making them calmer, clearer, and far more effective. It is not an abstract idea but a concrete practice, a discipline that transforms into a superpower when consistently trained.